During the demonstrations, you'll hear me use the word grain a lot. Now the grain refers to the grain on the fabric. You always mark the grain on the pattern as well, but it's important that when you lay your pattern on the fabric, you keep it on grain. So what is the grain? If I take this piece of plain calico, you will see that along this edge here, there is what's called a selvage. So if I draw a demonstration, this is going to be my reel of fabric, as it were. So there's a roll of fabric and it's coming off. So there's my fabric. This is the roll. It can be whatever you like. So I've pulled it out from the roll. So this becomes the width of the fabric. And then I can have as much as I like from the roll. Either side of the width of the fabric, you'll find there's what's called a selvage. It's this edge, and it's really strong, and it doesn't move. And sometimes you will find it can be rather tight and pucker the cloth. So when I'm working with fabric, I always cut this selvage off, otherwise it can slightly distort what you're trying to do. Now, if you look closely at any fabric, you'll see the grain because you'll see the weave. Now, this is a plain weave, and you'll have many, many threads that are running along the length of the fabric. So running along here. This is a continual thread. And this thread is called the warp. W-A-R-P. And that's the length of the fabric. Now coming in, going across the width of the fabric, you have another thread which will go over or under, over or under. It will start to weave. It will go, and this thread is called the weft. So across our calico, we've then got at right angles another thread going across the width of the fabric. And it's this one that will create the weave of your fabric. Now these two threads running at right angles are called the straight grain. And it's the straight grain that normally we place our garment along. So if I've got a pattern piece, which is from this block shape, and I say that I want the grain running parallel with the centre front of the body, I would place the pattern along that straight grain on the fabric. This keeps it strong. It doesn't stretch. Unless, of course, you're working with something that's got elastane or a stretch fibre in it. But if it's a pure woven fabric, it won't stretch. And we run down the long length, the warp thread, because it helps the garment sit straight and fall correctly. You can turn your pattern so it goes along the weft thread, which is running at right angles. So that also makes that straight. So again, it's a straight and it's a strong thread. But it's not quite the same, because you'll find that there can be, again, slight distortion sometimes, because this is the thread that's doing all the work, going backwards and forwards, making the weave, whereas the warp thread remains rigid. There's one more grain on fabric, and that is called the bias. And a true bias will run at 45 degrees across the fabric. Now when I pull the fabric along this line, you will see that it bends because it stretches. And this is why much lingerie, evening wear, is made and cut on the bias, because it can be moulded and manipulated around the body easier, so it creates less seams. So 3 grains. The warp grain, the weft grain, both which are straight, and then the bias grain, which creates a stretch and also a softness. So if I was to fold that around the collar, perhaps, you get a soft fold. If I was to fold around the straight grain, it's much more crisp, slightly more harsh. So it totally depends on your design and what you're pattern cutting, to how you use the grain on your patterns. But your patterns must be marked up so that you know how to lay them onto the fabric.